And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather showing slow-moving, weakening front will bring chance of rain and snow, or increasing chances for rain or snow across south central Alaska tonight, and mostly into the southern Copper River Basin, with the heavier amounts, of course, along the North Gulf Coast, but those amounts won't be all that heavy. Stays pretty nice over the southeast coast, and snow advances eastward in the central interior. Blizzard warning tonight for the Arctic coast, and increasing snow and blowing snow. Nunivak Island into the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta coastline here as this next system rapidly moves to the east. A couple of low centers back here, the one to the west the strongest, and that'll bring good storm force winds here in the tighter gradient late tonight and tomorrow, with gusty winds and widespread snow showers and snow over all of the Bering Sea here, and kind of a break behind the front as it pushes eastward with a let up in the winds and precipitation. With increasing wind again, south central Alaska could see gusts 50 to 60 miles an hour, especially in the higher pass areas, and dry for the Copper River Basin. This system moving off to the east, and conditions start to improve along the Arctic coast in the afternoon. Nice over the southeast coast, and a better chance for some rain and snow into the Panhandle, especially the central and northern areas on Thursday, and snow Thursday night and into snow, Thursday night into south central Alaska, or on Wednesday night and Thursday. Get the days straight here. Otherwise, more snow showers and gusty winds with that trough coming into the southwest coast. And winds begin to diminish over the Bering Sea, but still widespread snow and snow shower conditions all the way down to the Aleutians. And for the coastal water forecast here for the south coast of the Panhandle tomorrow, light variable winds at 5 knots, Clarence Strait southeast at 10, light and variable conditions for Stevens Passage. Lynn Canal, south winds 10 knots, southeast winds 10 to 15 knots for the north coast. And then on Thursday here for the north coast, south to southwest winds 25 to 40 knots. Otherwise, the central coast looking at south winds at 30, south 25 on the south coast. Lynn Canal, southeast 45 knots with higher gusts. Same thing for Stevens Passage. Clarence Strait, southeast at 15. And for Prince William Sound for Wednesday, south winds 15 knots. South at 20 knots, northern Cook Inlet, but gales for southern Cook Inlet with 10-foot seas. And good gales here for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands, 40 knots out of the south and southeast. Southwest 25 for the western North Gulf Coast. Variable to southwest at 10 to 15 knots for the eastern North Gulf Coast. And then gale warnings for the North Gulf Coast, the entire North Gulf Coast on Thursday. Southwest winds 35 to 40 knots. Gale warnings for Prince William Sound, south winds 35 knots with seas building to 9 feet. Cook Inlet, southwest winds 20 to 25 knots, and southwest 25 knot winds for Kamishak Bay, and the Barren Islands, southwest 30 knots. And for Kodiak Island tomorrow, south winds 40 knots across the whole area with seas anywhere from 9 to 15 feet. Bristol Bay, gale warning southeast at 35 knots, in the Alaska Peninsula, south to southwest winds 35 to 40 knots. And the outlook for Thursday, the Alaska Peninsula, southwest winds 30 to 40 knots. That southwest wind right into Bristol Bay at about 30 knots with 8-foot seas, and southwest winds 30 knots also for Kodiak Island. And for the eastern Aleutians tomorrow, gale warnings, southwest winds 35 to 40 knots. And for the central Aleutians here, southwest winds 45 knots with seas up to 25 feet. And then storm warnings here west of Adak all the way to Shemya and Attu, with the strongest winds from Kiska to Shemya out of the west and southwest at 55 knots. And then for Thursday, those winds come down west-southwest 30 to 35 knots west of Kisk-Kamchatka, and Adak and Atka all looking at gales for southwest winds 35 to 40 knots. And for the eastern Aleutians, southwest winds 45 knots. For the southwest coast tomorrow, south winds 40 knots. St. Lawrence Island, southeast winds 35 knots. Gale warnings also for Norton Sound, east winds 35 knots there. South at 35 for St. Matthew Island. And the Pribilof small craft advisory, southwest winds 30 knots. But those seas up around 18 feet. And for the Pribilofs on Thursday, southwest winds 35 knots with seas at 26 feet. And then south winds 20 knots there for St. Matthew Island, seas 18 feet. And for the Kuskokwim Delta Coast, south at 30 knots. Southeast winds 20 knots, Yukon Delta Coast, St. Lawrence Island, and Norton Sound. Up along the Arctic coast for tomorrow, gale warnings. The entire length of the coastline there, east winds 35 knots. And for the Chukchi Sea, east winds 20 to 30 knots. And then for the day on Thursday, for the Chukchi Sea, east to northeast winds 15 to 25 knots, brisk wind advisories. For the central and western Arctic coast, east winds 30 knots. And for the east side there, looking at east to northeast winds 20 to 25 knots.